Good morning.
Hi, Maribel. How
How's
you
it going?
doing?
I'm great.
I know you've worked with Glenn, but
Yeah.
you and I haven't really had the chance to chat.
Yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with Glenn. Glenn and I are doing a lot of MRC calls and talking about strategy for members and all kinds of crazy fun stuff. So that's what's going on with me.
We just bought this new house, so that's been like the thread for a few episodes. Is that process of moving and buying this house, and the latest thing is that we're looking into getting some like Wi-Fi Bluetooth door locks for the house. Because
Cool. I've got the August locks.
I don't know that one, but then like my wife was all worried that somebody was gonna like hack the lock.
They could maybe, but if somebody wants to get into your house badly enough and has enough mad skills to like Wi-Fi hack your door, then you're going to get broken into. It's not like there's a bunch of cyber criminals like rolling around town with like routers trying to hack your door. But
right, exactly.
Nothing's impossible, but it's just you're more challenged to make sure that your door actually opens when you want it to than somebody breaking into it.
Yeah. And also there's like a huge window in the door. It'd be much easier for them to just smash the window and crawl in through the window. Then I started looking at just Amazon reviews, and this one lock, the Kwikset Kivo Smart Lock, and the reviews were terrible. Like people are saying that like they got locked out and they couldn't get in, or they were in and in the middle of the night the locks like unlocked on their own, and they thought somebody was breaking in. Yeah. So I don't know.
Okay, that's a problem.
So I just need to do a little thing up front where I say like, welcome to Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics. Device Squad, fighting crimes against enterprise mobility worldwide. Bad UI, frustrating user experiences, poorly conceived mobile strategies, we defeat them all. This podcast series will cover all aspects of enterprise mobility, including strategy, development, design, testing, and more. My name is Steve Brickman. I'm a mobile strategist and UX architect with Propelics. First, a brief history of the company. Founded in 2011, Propelics is a mobile strategy consultancy helping enterprises worldwide devise true mobile strategies and develop world-class mobile applications across all industry verticals. Propelics clients include large companies like Amway, Bright Horizons, Bank of Montreal, Dubai Airports, Family Dollar, DLL, Cintas, Merck, and many more. Propelics' menu of services includes 8 different mobile kickstarts, covering everything from mobile strategy and road mapping to MCOE to UI UX design to mobile testing strategy, along with soup to nuts app design development and support. Additionally, Propelics offers 3 homegrown enterprise mobile products. Today, we have with us Maribel Lopez. I'm looking here at your Forbes bio, and it says, I track how mobile, IoT, and analytics change business. It says here that you are a thought leader and strategic advisor at Lopez Research. Also, you're the author of Right Time Experiences, Driving Revenue with Mobile and Big Data. So we'll talk about that too. We'll talk about Lopez Research, and we'll talk about the MRC, which you are the co-founder of, and that is the Mobile Research Council. You help companies understand and navigate digital transformation by analyzing today's most powerful tech trends, including mobile, cloud, big data, analytics, and IoT. Your company, Lopez Research, offers strategic advisory, speaking, and market research services. So why don't we just talk about your background a little bit? I'd love to know how you got into technology, a little bit about where you've been, and how you got going with Lopez Research, and what it is that interests you so much about this space.
So I started my career at Motorola, and I think that's when I first got interested in the whole concept of mobile and actually in technology, because Motorola did lots of data networking technology as well. So the whole concept of how networks happen and how you would do communications over wide area networks and phones. So that's how I got started. And then I had a series of other jobs that really were back and forth between working at a vendor like Motorola or Shiva or working at an industry analyst firm like IDC or Forrester. So Forrester was the last traditional market research firm that I worked for, and I had the great opportunity to study lots of different technology trends and then try to piece them together and help companies piece them together to really transform their businesses. So that's what I like to do. And in 2008, I moved to the West Coast and got that entrepreneurial bug and decided to go build my own firm to help companies figure out how to deal with these really epic technology shifts that we have happening now. You've got cloud computing, you've got mobile, you've got big data, you've got analytics, you've got IoT. It's just a new world of technology. There's a lot going on and a lot companies need to deal with.
You wrote this book, Right Time Experiences, Driving Revenue with Mobile and Big Data, back in 2014, which is pretty amazing.
It was even earlier given the fact that it takes a long time to actually publish a book with a traditional publisher.
Not to mention to write it. Why don't we talk about right time experiences a little bit, or sometimes they're known as contextual experiences. How did you get into that, and why did you pick that topic?
Well, I think like many industry analysts, you're always trying to figure out what's the future of technology. What will people be doing in 5 years from now? What will they be talking about 5 years from now? And since I was spending a lot of time in the mobile domain, I wanted to figure out what the future of mobile was for companies. We'd already talked about new devices, we had operating systems, people were starting to use things, and the question would be, what happens next? And when that question was posed, I started running down this chain that said, okay, really, where we want to get to is a world where your business processes, or if you're a consumer, your life in the consumer domain is responding and reacting to where you are, what you've done in the past, and trying to help guide you to what would be the next best set of actions. And that to me is really the concept was where we were going to go was the notion of contextual services, right information, right time, device of your choice. So wherever you are, you'd be able to use your devices to get just the information you needed at exactly the right time. And what I thought was really different about that was that we have created a set of sort of canned experiences. But with mobile and being able to have all your experiences on the go and have some context around what you've done or what's available at that point in time, that you could really change that dynamic. So that's where right time experiences came from. And when I started thinking about that, right time experiences weren't just about you having a mobile device. You needed to have access to data, and that data needed to be analyzed, and then something needed to be sent to you and presented in a way that you could consume with a nice user interface. And that's a lot of technology actually coming together for a bigger purpose. So rather than it just being a static app, in business, you'd call it a workflow. In consumer land, you would call it an experience. So I think they're both employee and consumer experiences. But I think in the consumer world, we don't think, oh, I'm doing a workflow now. You're thinking, I'm buying something, I'm trying to figure out how to get on the train, things of that nature.
And at the time, who did you feel like was leading the charge with right time experiences?
Companies like Disney were trying to create experiences that were associated with you in the park. Companies like Uber and Airbnb were very new, but they were trying to create different experiences around understanding your location and simplifying things. Progressive Insurance was talking about using IoT to change the risk dynamics in insurance and give better prices. We had other insurance companies that were talking about, eliminating the need for you to know what your account number was and where you were, and just making the process very simple for you to log that there's an accident, get a tow truck, capture, what the damage looked like by using the camera on your phone and GPS. So people were starting to create these really interesting experiences. Tesco was trying to help people figure out they weren't trying to help people figure out how to shop, but they were trying to figure out how they could optimize the mix of their food and their supply chain based on data that they were getting from the stores, so that, yes, I could have everything I needed, but they could also, as a business, be optimized. Things as simple as just being able to do photo capture for expense reports were actually really critical experiences that we started to see happen in this time that I would consider a right time experience.
And so in the 2 to 3 years since you wrote the book, how do you feel like the enterprise has increased their adoption of this kind of thinking? Or in other words, how has the sort of concept evolved in the last couple of years?
Okay, first of all, I'd say we're just getting to the concept for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
It's not that, I'd love, we spent a long time just convincing people that mobile was important. I think everybody's gotten the mobile is important menu.
That's right.
So I think that was stage one, right? And I look at this as that people move through 3 phases. They basically extend, enhance, evolve. So extending, they take basic things, they make applications available, or even parts of applications available on mobile. And that was email and calendar for a while in the enterprise world, but it's now moved into being approvals, richer apps, dashboards, right? So that's more of an extend phase. And you start enhancing things, right? So then you start looking for, well, how can I add location into that and make it better? Or how can I add image capture into that and make it better? And I think a lot of people are in that phase right now, just sort of understanding how they can take context from mobile, make it better. Maybe it's voice navigation that they didn't have access to before. Maybe it's creating a workbench style app where everything you need is sort of in a dashboard, and that takes data from different back-end systems and pulls it into an application. And then I think you really move to that right time experience phase and the evolve and transform kind of timeline, right? So there's certainly early pioneers that have been working on this a lot. For example, companies in the transportation space have been focused on mobile for a long time. And they're actually at that point now where they're starting to do really interesting things with mobile. So, for example, you look at somebody like American Airlines. They have a really interesting contextual consumer app. And then they're also looking at how does mobile apply to baggage handlers. So on one side, I'm trying to figure out how to effectively route somebody around the airport so that they can get all the services they need and get on a flight on time. Or figure out just when to leave the house because they've got the context of where you are, where the airport is you're going to, and how long it's going to take traffic-wise to get there. But then the baggage handlers, how to make their job more effective, how to make the concept of fixing planes easier and more effective, right? So both sides of the house. So that's an example in what you call a transportation category. Hotel is doing really great, amazing things. I can pick my room. I can unlock the door with my phone. I can really have a services conversation that doesn't necessarily require me to interact directly with a human, but I can still talk to someone via SMS, right? So I think we're seeing examples there. So there's lots of different examples. They're really very vertically focused for what, you could say is a right time experience. So it's happening, but I still think many people are in that second phase, which is where they're enhancing and trying to just unlock what I call the power of mobile.
You think it's happening a lot more in the consumer space than in the enterprise internal space?
Well, I think the enterprise, the difference in the consumer versus enterprise space is doing a business to employee app. You're talking about changing the process, right? So the first thing you're trying to do is just make something easier and faster. And then your second phase, where there's really that transformative thing, is changing how you're thinking about the business process in general. So that's a big deal. That's a core thing. Whereas I think there's a lot more low-hanging fruit on the consumer side. So, for example, banking, check deposits is a great example. Mobile check deposits. That's transformative on the customer experience side. And you had to add some technology to that. but you didn't fully reinvent the concept of depositing a check. You're still depositing a check. You just made it so much easier. And you had that concept that had already started in the ATM world. So it's an evolution of that concept. Whereas maybe if you are trying to figure out how to change an equipment repair process on the enterprise side, that might have bigger ramifications. I've got to connect into supply chain data. I might have to change my inventory and tagging system. So I think that both of those, the banking and say the changing the service process are both complex transactions, but it's trying to figure out, what's the return on investment by doing that in an organization for a business to employee versus what do I might have going on the business to consumer side that I need to consider as well. So really, I think the biggest challenge for people in mobile is not necessarily the technology. It's more figuring out what to do and how that's going to drive value in your organization. So is making it simpler to file an expense report going to drive top line revenue? No. I mean, that's a nice to have. That's very important. It's a good mobile use case. It's an enhanced use case. But what really clicks that you say, okay, we've prevented downtime and there's savings associated with that. Or we could do 5 more sales calls a day and there's potential revenue associated with that. So it's trying to find the use cases that make mobile really sing and drive value for the organization. And that's when you get into some of those moving from enhancing to transforming.
Right. Have you heard the story of how we came up with the Amway Maps app idea? So we're in the ideation, and every meeting that we had at the Amway campus, everybody was late for every single meeting. And we hadn't figured out what app to build yet. So finally somebody asked, well, why is everybody late for every meeting? And it turned out that nobody could find their way to the conference rooms because the campus is so large and it's so labyrinthian. And then we found out later that they also changed the names of all the conference rooms. Every 6 months or so, they have a contest.
Ridiculous.
It was the most absurd thing. So then we realized, okay, well, your best use case and your best business value is going to be gotten by getting everybody to their meetings on time. You're going to save countless hours of productivity every day. So that became the app that we built.
That's a great example of something that's a simple enhancement, but you can actually drive value on that, right? You can even drive it back to an ROI. So.
Right, exactly. I'd like to back up a little bit. I meant to ask you a little more about Lopez Research. I'd love to know at what point you decided to create Lopez Research and how that's going and why you decided to go that direction.
Well, I decided to create Lopez Research because one of the things I think is really important in strategy work is to sort of survey the whole landscape of strategy and try to figure out what are the big things that you're trying to do, and then try to figure out what are the sets of technologies, and I mean sets, usually not one, that would come together to make that happen. And I think a lot of times what happens in IT strategies, the way we've structured organizations are structured to think of their group. I am responsible for mobile device procurement. I am responsible for IT support. I am responsible for cloud computing, right? So nobody can be an expert in everything, so that makes sense. But from a strategy standpoint, I think you need somebody to help you think about what are all the parts, and do we have a strategy that is addressing all the parts? Are all the guys and gals marching in the same direction for a common goal? And frequently you find out that that's not the case. So you'll go down the process of creating a strategy, and I've actually worked with the Propelics guys. We were actually working with some clients together, and you realize how important, the methodology Propelics has about pulling together all those people together, all the stakeholders, to try to figure out what's the common goal and who needs to participate is really important. So one of the things I wanted to design with Lopez Research is a place where we started at the top, and then we tried to figure out how the technologies I would know about, how they would fit into the picture, so that when you were rolling them out, you didn't end up in one of those things where you rolled out what you needed to roll out, but it wasn't going to be effective because it couldn't connect to anything else. And that's actually a big challenge. The idea was to help people think about what are these new right time experiences, because I've been noodling on the concept for a while. how do we build these right time experiences? How do we change our organizations? And I felt that that just didn't fit into the structure of a normal market research firm's charter.
Yeah, that reminds me of an experience I had doing some strategy for AAA, and they wanted a car finder app. And this was like 2010, like really early on. And I came up with what I thought was this brilliant solution to not begin with any specific brand, but rather just start with a generic sort of image of a car. And then from there, they could say, I want something bigger. I want something that gets better gas mileage. I want something that has more horsepower, etc., just by swiping the image up or down or right or left. And they were like, well, that's awesome, but there's no way we can build that. Our database infrastructure will not support that kind of, navigation. So it kind of goes along with what you were saying about having all the players in the room so that, all the capabilities are made obvious to everyone and things get built.
Cool.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In terms of getting the complete picture from all involved parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then, you do it, you build something great like that, and they're like, that's wonderful, but we can't connect it to anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you got a great UI with no data go into it.
Yeah, that was early on at Aperion. That was where our process was kind of flawed because we would do like all the sort of strategizing in a vacuum on our own and then go into the meeting with the client and pitch it. That was an example where it just fell flat because it was unbuildable. Propelics is a very different approach, as you know. Recently, you were involved with one of our workshops.
Yes, I was.
It was like an 8-week strategy workshop.
It was. We did an 8-week strategy workshop. We met with various groups at the client site to try to help them figure out where they should start their mobile journey. What type of use cases would be important? How do you drive it back to the overall business goals of the organization? What's sort of the walk, crawl, run approach to that? And the great thing about doing this style of workshop is we looked at all aspects of helping a company think about mobile. So I think people really think a lot about, mobile's got to have a good UX, but there's lots of other things mobile has to have. It has to have security and governance, and that's part of the process. It has to have the ability to be tested and supported, and that's part of the process. So working through all those angles with an organization to try to figure out how this will actually be built, run, maintained, updated, processes for gathering feedback, understanding, people can build really great apps, but if it doesn't meet the user's needs, or if they don't gather feedback to keep, those apps fresh, adoption suffers. And that's almost as bad as not having done anything at all.
Definitely. And how did those sessions go? How do you feel like your process merged with the Propelics process?
Well, I think I do a lot of the strategy work and trying to help people figure out what the use cases look like. So I think that was sort of the obvious place for me to slot in. And then I learned a lot about how organizations had to think of some of the more, shall we say, fine-tuned implementations of what that would look like. So I think my process of working with Art of the Possible and Propelics' process of working with Art of the Possible actually gelled quite nicely together. And also looking at different industries. Both of our companies look at various industries, and we can bring experience of the types of features and functions that existed in one industry that might be applicable in a different industry that someone wouldn't think about because that's not how they spend their days. So that's sort of the value when you go to an organization to have worked with many different styles of companies in many different geographies and understand, everything from how bandwidth constraints might affect an app to how people might use different style devices in different geographies to just the fact that something that could be done with image capture in one industry could work very well in another industry.
Yeah, it's amazing how flexible these devices are and how significant these features can be across different verticals. And it's amazing how many clients still don't realize all that they can achieve with mobile devices. That's what really shocks me the most, I think.
Well, I think it gets back to thinking more about trying to replicate a process as opposed to building a process with new sets of technologies. Like if you built all those apps and services today, you'd build them differently because you would know that you would have motion sensing and image capture and location-based services all available to you and your devices. When people built these PC apps, anywhere from 10 to 20 to 25 years ago, they didn't have access to any of that. It was just a very different, flat experience that was revolutionary at the time, but is not revolutionary today.
So how did you get involved with Propelics in the first place? We hear your name all the time from day to day on the Slack channels, and you're constantly coming up. But I've always wondered how you wound up joining up with us.
I think Adam and team were looking at trying to combine the Propelics methodology with some research, and they were out looking in the industry for someone that had been looking at use cases and actually looking at a lot of enterprise use cases, because I think in mobile there were a lot more interesting consumer use cases. So talking to somebody that spent some more time thinking about enterprise, I think was high on the Propelics list. So we had a lot of joint thoughts around, both of us came at it from different places, but had a lot of similar thinking, I should say, that when they were looking for an analyst team to work with, they said, well, we think that, the way we think about things is pretty aligned, and the types of companies that we're serving are aligned, and we both want to push better, edgier experiences, not recreate the past. So I think there was a lot of vision alignment that just worked well. And so Adam and I had some chats, and here we are today.
Yeah, it feels like we have a real shared vision. Like, Propelics is really all about the user experience. I think that's one thing that really differentiates us, is that we don't compromise on design and we don't compromise on user experience either. We're very user-centric. Obviously, you're the same way, looking at these sort of micro moment experiences and things like that as ways to create the most tailored experience and deliver the right content, the right features at just the right moment to users. That's not really a question. And so, how did the Mobile Research Council come about?
So the idea behind the Mobile Research Council was to try to marry research and best practices and collaborative style community all together. The thought was you can have consulting and strategy services, you can have research, and you can have community, and they've kind of been all separate. And part of the goal was to try to create an environment where, with the Mobile Research Council, large companies, these can be in pharma, manufacturing, logistics, transportation, banks. We kind of have a wide range of retail groups supported. That these groups could come together and talk about what are their challenges in mobile, that members would be able to present what they're doing in mobile and also ask questions about some other companies about what was happening in mobile, that there would be guest speakers that were also practitioners, so it wouldn't be an environment to just have vendors talk about what they're doing, but really just have companies that are deploying technology talk about why they selected the technology, what they were trying to accomplish, if that technology helped them accomplish things, what their overarching strategy was, and have people learn from that. And then also have other presentations that were, say, maybe more research style focused. Like we just did a session on what all the WWDC and Google I/O sessions meant for people that were trying to build mobile solutions, or thoughts on what are the next generation contextual services. One of our members just did a great presentation on how they're working with Amazon Echo in both B2C and B2B style interactions, and how they're looking at augmented reality. So trying to take these things that could be interesting, esoteric, but make them real and talk about how they could be used in different use cases with different types of companies. So I think that that's actually, I think we started in a different place. I think we started in a place where this might be more of a hub for research, but then really decided it was going to be more of a community and more of a sharing of best practices that also had research in it, that also had some visions. Like I'm talking a lot about machine learning right now and chatbots. So, some of the things that are exciting me in the landscape of where things are going, like what's next for contextual services. Well, there's a lot of technology that still has to be fine-tuned to make contextual services actually happen. So I'm looking at some of that right now. I'm looking at how analytics are fitting into the picture and how they're evolving. So I think that the idea behind this is there'd be a group of people that was focused on the what's next. There'd be a group of people talking about the what's now. And there'd be a bunch of customers sharing what they're actually doing and if it's working or not and trying to help each other out. And so far, I think it's going great.
So where do you see big opportunities for companies today in mobility?
Yeah, I think most companies have kind of started to address the low-hanging fruit. They're doing their paper replacement strategies, extending some basic apps. And now we're starting to see people create new categories of service in mobile. So they are capturing data that they didn't capture before. They are transforming things like field service with augmented reality, or they are looking at having better data associated with that so that they can understand what the equipment is or where the parts are. There's lots of talk about how we could get better cable and telephone service once these operators adopt all that. So I'm personally looking forward to that to make sure that our services are up and running pretty quickly. Within organizations, there's always been a struggle to get information. No matter what industry you're in, the biggest trend that's going on right now is how do I get the right data into hands of people fast with mobile? And maybe you are someone that is at a building site and you're trying to figure out when the materials are coming in, you're trying to change the design and do real-time updates to construction. That's one thing. You're in a truck and you're trying to figure out there's a big storm, there's traffic, there's too much heat. There's lots of things that can impact the transports of goods and services that you're looking at. If you're in healthcare, you're trying to make sure that drug administration is done properly and that people have the right patient data when they go to see somebody, because that impacts lives, right? So there's a ton of interesting things that are going on that are really all associated with getting data to a person very quickly so that they can make a decision and act on it. What would happen in the past is you'd have a PC and you would have 5 apps and you would go to each of those apps individually and collect a piece of data. And then you would take all that data that you'd written down, probably on a piece of paper, and figure out what it meant, right? What we're trying to do now in mobile is we're trying to give you a phone or a tablet or a ruggedized device, and theoretically you're supposed to do 2 or 3 clicks on something and all the information you need is there. You're not going to 5 apps, you're not navigating down 8 menu structures, you're basically picking up the device, getting the data. And then the next step of that is it comes to you before you even know you need it. So it surfaces to you and tells you that you need to do something, which is, some of the predictive stuff that we're talking about. So I think that's, if I have to say the one thing that every company is struggling with, but that has extreme opportunity, it is that.
Right. And an example, I know that we're working on some rerouting features for Cintas for their drivers in the event of, traffic and accidents and things like that, and rescheduled appointments and so forth.
Huge customer care win, huge win in terms of savings of oil and gas.
Yeah. Time savings. What about IoT? It's bad enough when you can't even get like a reliable Wi-Fi door lock, but do you feel like the IoT is ready for prime time in the enterprise?
I feel that, like mobile, IoT is a 20-year journey and that we're somewhere in the middle of it. So aspects of it are ready for prime time, but not all aspects. So first of all, I guess the first thing to say is there's no one IoT, right? There's different IoT depending on if you're a farmer or a manufacturer or someone that works in gen business.
Right.
So the question becomes looking at what does IoT-led digital transformation look like for you in your industry? I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think that in every organization, there's a place that the IoT makes sense. And I think that there are sort of 4 categories of that where IoT makes sense, right? One is in energy management. Everybody has energy, right? It's electricity, it's HVAC, so there's something that can be done in and around energy management. Predictive maintenance. Everybody has equipment. No matter what kind of organization you are. Let's just say, you're 5 guys and gals in a garage. You've got printers, you've got computers. So if everybody has equipment, there's some aspect of predictive maintenance that's always available to you, right? Supply chain visibility. IoT has a lot of implications for the health of the supply chain and then just the visibility of where things are. So location tracking of your goods that are coming to you, health tracking of those goods. If you imagine that you're in grocery, you want to make sure that the transport of the goods is done in a temperature environment that makes sense for them so they're not spoiled. Right? If you are building parts at a plant, it's obvious that you're looking at supply chain visibility windows. And then security. Security is considered a big risk with IoT for a lot of organizations. But if we also flip that over, IoT has the ability to create some really interesting security opportunities. So one of the things that we talked about at WWDC was this concept of your watch can be one of the factors that allows you to easily unlock your laptop without putting in a passcode. It knows it's you because maybe you have camera recognition and a watch, or you've got proximity of your device and a biometric device, such as you're either scanning on the phone with a fingerprint or you're using heart rate. So there's a lot of opportunities. There's video surveillance that IoT is actually a very good use case for. So I think those are 4 use cases that somewhere in every organization you can use one or more of this. And then when you get into different style of organizations, certain things make much more sense. Like if you're in manufacturing or someone like a John Deere with tractors, like preventative maintenance is huge. If you have cranes, you want your cranes to be fully booked and you want them to always be fully operational. So that's a combination of things like the location tracking and predictive maintenance. So I think there's lots of use cases that aren't even far stretches, but instead of talking about it as the IoT, which analysts like myself are very are guilty of, you can blame us for that one. And the 50 billion devices and the IoT will change the world. We need to really talk about IoT in specific use cases.
We've been talking about a lot of big picture stuff today and long-term trends and things like that. But what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that these companies are facing in sort of making some headway with these trends, like right time experiences and incorporating IoT and so forth?
I would call the first one islands. Everyone is an island. Every group is an island. We have data silo islands. We have technology silo islands. So I think the first one is trying to make bridges between the islands so that they work together. We talked a little bit about that earlier. So I'm extremely optimistic about number 2, but number 2 is still a challenge, and that is new thinking. Every technology era that you walk into, you always start by replicating what you had because you need that to work in the new domain. Well, we need to move beyond that. We can't just keep replicating our ERP and our CRM and our HR. We have to build new things as a result of that. And that new thing takes a lot of thinking. The third is, until recently, there were so many choices in mobile. The market hadn't streamlined much that people got bogged down in just picking technologies. They're spending so much time trying to pick a platform and just not doing anything. I think we've gotten to a place now where people started to pick platforms. So we talked a bit about the challenge of knowing what to do with it. But I think that not getting caught up in the, oh, I can't do it because this isn't fully baked yet. You don't really have the option to do nothing. You have to do something. So the question is, when you're doing something, how do you limit your exposure? And that's really what I spent a lot of time talking to people about. We have to move into the new technology domain. I understand it's risky. No one wants to lose their job because they made the wrong technology choice. There's all this talk in Silicon Valley of fail fast, fail fast, fail fast, Well, that's great if you're failing fast with some other person's $20 million. But, if it's your $20 million, you might not be so quick to want to make a million mistakes, right?
Right.
So I think I think we have to balance the risk aversion to actually getting something done. I'd say the fourth thing is iterate fast. As organizations, we are not accustomed to basically redoing things every 6 months, every 12 months. A lot of people are in the multi-year cycle. So we're talking about, pushing updates all the time. We're talking about continuous delivery, continuous innovation, and many people are still on waterfall design methodology, right? So moving from waterfall to agile to continuous, embracing open source is another issue because open source changes a lot. That adds a level of complexity into it. So those are some of the challenges, I think. I don't think any of them are insurmountable. I just think you have to go in understanding that, okay, if these are my big gating factors, how do I get over each of these? You need a plan to get over each of those.
What new technology excites you the most? I'm kind of hot for VR, but I wonder how long before we'll see it in the enterprise. I think it'll be a while before we see any adoption of it. But where do you think the most potential lies?
I do think VR is very cool. What I think VR and AR struggle from is the concept that the devices that we use are sort of unnatural as humans. Big helmets, big goggles, cyborgy looking things that you wouldn't want to be seen in the street in.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've got some cultural challenges and some weight challenges and things around these are heavy, right? You don't want to wear them all day. So I think some of those will be addressed. So that to me is very exciting. And I combine two things. I think that is one track that's super exciting. I think the other track that is super exciting is machine learning combined with natural language processing. Right. I guess what I'm really getting at is that the concept that we talk to our services, while it also sounds a bit dorky, I have to say people are talking to things now, right? You're going to expect to walk into your house and do that Tom Cruise, turn the lights on, Minority Report thing, right?
Yeah.
You're expecting that. That's what people want. And if people want that in their home life, Echo's been very popular. And nobody thought it would be popular, but the people that have it love it to pieces, and they just want to ask it to do stuff all the time, right, all day long. I don't know how it's translating into revenue for Amazon. That's a different question, but all I can say is that once you get that kind of momentum around technology, it is not a far cry to see that your employees would come into the organization and also say they want to see it there. So I think that we're going to see a lot of voice navigation. I think that requires a lot of back-end machine learning. I think there's some really great things that are happening in computer-aided vision that are going to help that as well. So auto recognition of things that you can do smart replies. And some of these things cross over, right? So what's computer-aided vision? When you think of it, it's like, okay, if I hover, if I take a picture of something, then it recognizes that that's equipment XYZ, and then maybe it surfaces a manual to me, right? So that I can fix XYZ. That's an example in business that's not all that far-fetched. I got the phone, I take the picture, the recognition's really good because of the image capture quality. It matches up with something that you have in your database and then goes to your content management system and sucks up a lot of data. All of that's possible. We just have to say, oh, that would be good to do, right? And then there's the, next iteration of that where you've got, sort of smart safety helmets. So the person knows not to enter the building because it's too hot or too cold or what have you, right? Don't touch that. It's the wrong thing. Lots of things that could happen with that. So I see those as use cases that we'll see within the 5-year timeframe. But I also think that people are currently underestimating that the reason that people complained about Siri and the like not working was people say things differently. So there's a lot of machine learning intelligence that has to happen for, you might say, open the doors. I might say, doors, please. And, the system has to understand that those are the same commands. Like, what does doors, please mean? I left out a few words. At some point, there's going to have to be some intelligence around that. So I think that that's what's pretty exciting. I know there's a lot of talk about robots replacing humans, but what I look at it is there's a lot of technology that's going to augment what a human can do. And that, I think, is super powerful.
Do you think at some point we'll see like the convergence of all these new technologies? I kind of can see like big data converging with bot technology, converging with VR or augmented reality, so that at some point in the future, maybe we'll just be talking to the air. We'll have a VR device that's practically invisible on our face, and we'll just receive answers either spoken back to us, or we'll get them in some kind of invisible device visually.
Yeah, I think the direction is to make all these things work together and to do it in a way that doesn't get in the way of you being a human. Nobody wants to walk around being a computer, right? So how do you get it so that you can leverage all that technology, get what you need to do done faster, more accurately, and just not have it be creepy and weird?
I think even Google Glass was viewed as being too cyborg for people.
I had a photo that I put up in one of my presentations that literally had a scene from Star Trek and the whole cyborg thing and Sergey wearing Google Glass, and they looked very similar. It was like, okay, we're still a little too sci-fi on this one, design principle, not quite there yet, but, good first showing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of a cultural stigma that need to be overcome too. I remember with Google Glass, people would be like afraid of somebody who came into a restaurant with a Google Glass on because they would assume that he's just shooting video without them knowing it. So there's sort of those kind of privacy issues, or the assumption of invasion of privacy that needs to be addressed also, at least in the, in like a social setting.
I don't think that'll change. I think the social networking generation was the beginning of the really big debates over what's public and what's private and how you share things. And I think increasingly this dialogue is just going to continue to come up, and it will be even more prevalent because there will be recordings everywhere. And what do you do with that, right?
Yeah.
So how's that accessed? And you will be using services that will collect your data, and how much is that your data versus how much is that shared? And as organizations, we're going to want to create services where we can sell and mine that data. And some of that data should be able to be sold and mined, and others not. And so figuring out where the line is and not letting the need for a line stall you in innovation is a really big challenge.
I spoke with the CTO of a company called Crimson Hexagon. I don't know if you're familiar with them, a couple of weeks ago. And that's exactly what they do. They mine social media for sort of marketing info, basically, for their clients, or product usage information, and then they report back to the client. They're analyzing images as well, and audio also, and all kinds of things.
So if you share something and it turns out that it is a great photo and company XYZ wants to use it, is it public domain or not? Do you need to be paid for it or not? You've already shared it in the open domain, right? So there are all these challenges that I think will come up, and that's just saying something innocuous, right? If you shared a family photo, then I guess that's an even bigger challenge, right? I think we're entering a brave new world.
Yeah.
But it's challenging and very exciting, though.
It is. Well, Maribel, thanks so much for hopping on.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Be great to have you on again.
Yeah, let's do that. That'd be great.
All right, sounds great. And thank you, folks, for tuning in to Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics.
Talk to you soon.
Take
Cheers.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.